there's no perfect answer. You weigh the data, you consult the experts, you make the call, and then 4 people climb into a rocket. Artemis 2 is not the end goal. It's step 2 on a staircase. Proving that a private company could build orbital rockets, SpaceX didn't just build a business. It rewrote what was possible. It opened a door that has since become a flood. 1.5 to 1.75 or 2 trillion plus or whatever it is, SpaceX would be valued at somewhere between 60 and 100 times current revenue. That's aggressive. Right now, at this exact moment, 4 human beings are traveling through deep space. Not in a simulation, not in a film, not on a screen somewhere. They're in a capsule called Orion, named after the hunter, the constellation, the eternal marker sailors used to find their way home. And they are further from Earth than any human has been in over 50 years. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen, commander, pilot, mission specialist, an American crew of 3, and for the first time in history, a Canadian alongside them. And when you zoom out and you pull back from that capsule, hurtling through the void, you realize that this single mission is the tip of an extraordinary iceberg. One that has been building for a decade, quietly, and then all at once. Today, we're going to talk about the new space age. Not the one that scientists dreamed about in the 1960s. The one that's actually happening right now. The entrepreneurs, the satellites, the data centers heading into orbit, the startups betting their futures on the moon, and the question underneath all of it. Are the science fiction stories, the ones we grew up watching, finally coming true? Let's go back to the early 2000s for a second. Space exploration, for most people, felt like something that belonged to history. The moon landings were this legendary, almost mythological thing that happened before most of us were even born. NASA was doing important work, don't get me wrong, but it was government work, bureaucratic, expensive, slow. And then in comes Elon Musk, founding a company with almost absurdly ambitious name, Space Exploration Technologies, SpaceX. At the time, the idea of a private company building rockets seemed, quaint, maybe even delusional. Rockets were what superpowers did, not startups. SpaceX's first 3 launches failed, all 3. The company was weeks from bankruptcy. Musk poured in the last of his personal funds, money he'd made from PayPal, and said essentially, one more shot. On September 28th, 2008, the Falcon 1 reached orbit. The 4th launch. The one that saved the company. And that moment, that stubborn against the odds moment, is arguably the starting gun for everything that followed. Because here's what happened next. By proving that a private company could build orbital rockets, SpaceX didn't just build a business. It rewrote what was possible. It opened a door that has since become a flood. The numbers tell the story clearly. In 2025 alone, space tech companies raised over $8 billion in equity funding. 54% increase over the year before. Let me say that again. 154% year-on-year growth. The space tech market is now estimated to reach nearly $1 trillion by 2033, growing at over 7% compound annually. The industry employs about 3.5 million people globally and added nearly 200,000 new employees in just the past year. It's growing. 69 new space companies raised their first ever funding round in 2024. Some of them are building launch vehicles. Some are building satellites the size of a shoebox. Some are building the software that tells those satellites what to do. We've gone from space being the domain of two superpowers, America and the Soviet Union, way back when, to a global ecosystem of over 35,000 companies. India is planning to invest $44 billion in its space economy by 2033. Europe is building independent launch and satellite capabilities at a pace that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. South Korea, Japan, Singapore, the UAE, all of them now have credible active space programs. And the thing that enabled all of this, the single underlying variable that changed everything, was the cost to get to orbit. In the 1990s, putting a kilogram of payload into low Earth orbit cost somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. Today, a Falcon 9 launch can do it for under $2,000. And if Starship, SpaceX's next-generation super heavy rocket, delivers on its promise, that number could fall below $100 per kilogram. Think about what that means. It means things that were economically unthinkable, massive satellite constellations, orbital manufacturing, even data centers in space, suddenly become viable business models. SpaceX made space cool again. But more importantly, it made space economically rational again. And that's the foundation for everything we're going to talk about today. Now, this brings us back to these 4 people in that capsule. Artemis 2 launched on the 1st of April 2026. And no, that's not an April Fool's joke. From Launch Complex 39B at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, the same pad that launched Apollo 10, the same pad that launched the Space Shuttle, a pad soaked in history now writing a new chapter. The mission is a 10-day journey. Orbit the Earth twice, test all the systems, then fire the main engine and head for the moon. On April 2nd, after the translunar injection burn, the Artemis 2 crew became the first people to leave Earth's orbit since the Apollo program ended in 1972. More than 50 years, 2 generations. Reed Wiseman is the commander, a Navy test pilot who's been waiting years for this mission. Victor Glover is the pilot and will become the first Black person to travel to the moon. Christina Koch, the first woman to do so, and Jeremy Hansen, the first Canadian to venture this far from Earth. Historically significant at every turn. But let's not get so caught up in the symbolism that we miss the substance. Artemis 2 is explicitly a test flight. The crew isn't landing on the moon. That comes later. What they're doing is putting the hardware through the paces in the most demanding environment possible, testing the Orion capsule's life support systems with actual human beings aboard, testing the radiation shielding, testing emergency procedures, testing manual docking maneuvers, and flying further from Earth than any human has been since Apollo 13. Over 248,000 miles. The Orion spacecraft itself, named Integrity for this mission, is a fascinating piece of engineering. The crew module is American. The service module, which handles propulsion and power, comes from the European Space Agency. International collaboration baked into the hardware. Now, there was some drama getting there. The mission was originally supposed to fly in 2024, then delayed to 25, then delayed again to February 2026. Issues with the heat shield, the protective layer that stops the capsule from burning up on re-entry, required careful analysis and ultimately decision by NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman to proceed with the existing design after thorough review. A redesigned heat shield is planned for Artemis 3. These are the kind of decisions that live at the intersection of engineering, risk management, and institutional courage. There's no perfect answer. You weigh the data, you consult the experts, you make the call, and then 4 people climb into a rocket. Artemis 2 is not the end goal. It's step 2 on a staircase. Artemis 3, currently targeted for 2027, is where SpaceX's Starship enters the picture. Starship will serve as the lunar lander, docking in lunar orbit with the Orion capsule to transfer 2 astronauts to the moon's surface. The South Pole region, which scientists believe holds water ice in permanently shadowed craters, water ice that can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, rocket fuel, the refueling station for everything that comes next. Artemis 4 in 2028 is supposed to be the crewed landing itself, the first humans on the lunar surface since Eugene Cernan lifted off in December 1972 and said quietly, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return." He was right. It just took us a little longer than anyone expected. But NASA and SpaceX are just 2 nodes in a much larger network. The ecosystem that has grown up around the new space age is vast, diverse, and increasingly commercial. We're not just talking about launch vehicles, we're talking about the entire supply chain of getting things to space, operating once they're there, and extracting value from what they do. Let me tell you about our friends at Your CFO, the financial planning system for your B2B startup's growth. Running a business is hard enough. You're focused on product, you're focused on sales. You don't have time to hire your own CFO or maybe even your own bookkeepers, and your CFO is here to help. Building your forecast is easy as 1, 2, 3. You set your business as usual case, then you set up what your growth initiatives are going to be, whether it's launching new products, hiring plans, market expansion, and put those all together and generate your final forecast. And with your projections set, you can run variance analysis, stay ahead of any shortcoming or overachievement so that you can adjust in real time. Need to look forward? You can build out your rolling forecast. As the actuals update, you have new and improved forecasts. Have fundraising plans in the future? Build out your forecasted cap table. Understand what metrics you need to hit those valuation targets. And last but not least, all those board reports, investor reports, fundraising, financial projections, all exportable, all buildable, all in one place. So go to yourcfo.tech. That's yourcfo.tech to get started today and make an impact on your business. Let me give you a feel for the breadth of what's happening. Rocket Lab, based in California but originally from New Zealand, has built itself into the number 2 launch provider in the world. In 2025, they secured an $805 million contract to build missile warning and tracking satellites for the U.S. Space Development Agency. That's nearly 50% more than their entire revenue from the previous year in a single contract. They're doing 38% year-on-year growth with nearly $2 billion in backlog. Apex, Los Angeles startup that's doing for satellites what Henry Ford did for cars. Building satellite bus platforms, essentially the chassis that everything else sits on, in a factory at scale. They raised $95 million in Series B last year because every new satellite constellation needs a bus. And there are a lot of new satellite constellations. Hadrian is building automated precision manufacturing factories to supply the parts that rockets and satellites need. Because here's a bottleneck people don't think about. You can design a great satellite, but if the precision machine parts take 18 months to produce, you're stuck. Hadrian is trying to make that 10 times faster. $117 million in Series B backed by Andreessen Horowitz and the venture arm of Raytheon. The Exploration Company, a Franco-German startup founded by, I butcher the name, but Helene Huby, former Airbus executive, is building Nikes. I'm assuming that I'm probably mispronouncing that as well, but it's a modular, reusable, in-orbit, refillable cargo capsule. They raised $160 million in Series B at the end of 24. And why does this matter? Because if you want an economy in space, not just missions, but a sustained presence, you need supply lines. Next is aiming to be the supply chain. And then there's the Earth observation segment, which is quietly one of the most commercially important areas of the whole industry. You have companies like Planet Labs, already publicly traded, just signed a $260 million contract with Germany in 2025 for satellite data supporting European defense and security. Think about that. A company providing satellite imagery as a service on contract to sovereign governments. That's a business model that didn't really exist 15 years ago. The number the number of satellites in orbit is growing at a pace faster than Moore's law. That's a direct quote from Chad Anderson, the founder of Space Capital, who put it more colorfully than I could. And he says, that's creating an unprecedented amount of data that we're now unlocking, and it's continuing to power the world's largest industries on Earth. Agriculture, shipping, insurance, weather, commodities trading, defense, all of these industries are now making decisions, billion-dollar decisions, based on data that comes from small metal boxes orbiting the planet at 17,000 miles per hour. Now, there's also a consolidation happening. The easy money era of space venture capital from 2021 has passed. Companies need real revenue, real traction, real defensible positions. A number of promising early-stage companies have already wound down or been quietly acquired. The median outcome for many space startups is still undetermined. But here's the thing. The infrastructure is being built regardless. The launch cadence is real. The customers, both government and commercial, are real. The ecosystems in the US, in Europe, in Asia are all independently reinforcing each other. And into this ecosystem, something happened in the last week of March 2026 that has sent shockwaves through every corner of the industry. On the 1st of April 2026, the same day Artemis 2 launched, which is either beautiful symmetry or a very busy Tuesday, as SpaceX confidentially filed for initial public offering with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, an IPO. The target, a June listing on NASDAQ. The entire blogosphere is filled with talk about the valuation. It's being reported somewhere between $1.5 to $1.75 trillion. Then another story came out saying $2 trillion plus. The expected fundraise is somewhere north of $75 billion. Whatever it comes out at, it's going to be big, not just in dollar value, but from the sheer symbolism that it will be the largest IPO in the history of public markets by a significant margin. And to put SpaceX's trajectory in context, 6 years ago in 2020, the company was valued at $46 billion. Today, that's being marked up by nearly 40 times. Makes you wish you got in early. No company in private market history has compounded this steeply while staying private. Now, in the AI era, we're probably starting to see a lot of that starting to happen. But for the time being, SpaceX stands out. The financial engine behind that valuation isn't necessarily just the rockets. It's Starlink. Starlink is SpaceX's satellite internet constellation. It ended 2025 with over 10 million subscribers globally. It generated $10 billion in revenue in 2025 alone, and analysts project that it could reach $24 billion by the end of 2026. Now, to understand what Starlink is doing, think about it this way. There are roughly 3 billion people on Earth who either have no internet access or have internet that's functionally unusable, too slow, too unreliable, too expensive. Starlink's constellations of approximately 10,000 satellites in low Earth orbit can reach almost all of them. And it's doing so at speeds that rival, or at least in some cases beat, ground-based broadband. direct-to-cell connectivity, where a phone connects directly to a satellite without needing a terrestrial tower, is rolling out now. The implications for remote areas, for maritime and aviation connectivity, for military and government use cases, they're enormous. But the IPO isn't just about Starlink either. In February 2026, SpaceX merged with xAI. We talked about this on a previous podcast. This is Elon Musk's artificial intelligence venture. The combined entity now encompasses launch services, satellite internet, AI development, and even the social platform X. When SpaceX lists, Musk will become the first person in history to helm two separate trillion-dollar publicly traded companies simultaneously. Now, who knows? We floated the idea in a prior podcast that Tesla and SpaceX make a logical merger further down the road for a number of reasons that we could talk about. But what does a SpaceX IPO mean for the wider space economy? Well, the direct effect is already visible. Every space stock moved up when the filing was announced. Rocket Lab shares jumped, investors poured into the sector, the narrative shifted from space is expensive and risky to space is the next infrastructure play. The deeper effect is about liquidity and legitimacy. For years, venture capitalists have been sitting on paper gains in space companies, waiting for an IPO cycle that never came. If SpaceX goes public successfully, it validates the entire sector. It creates a benchmark. It gives other space companies a path to liquidity as well. And recycled capital will always find its way into the next generation of startups, be that space or otherwise. But there is a cautionary note worth mentioning. 1.5 to 1.75 or 2 trillion plus or whatever it is, SpaceX would be valued at somewhere between 60 and 100 times current revenue. That's aggressive. That's a bet on future growth materializing, on Starlink scaling, on Starship delivering, on space-based AI infrastructure becoming real, on further space exploration. If any of these pillars wobble, the valuation could potentially wobble with it. Without a doubt, no matter what company he touches, we do understand that there is an Elon premium. Not many entrepreneurs have done what he's done. But here's the thing. He didn't build SpaceX by making conservative assumptions about the future. He built the company by being aggressive and being forward-thinking. So let's turn to things that sound like science fiction, but are already being funded, tested, and in some cases launched. Here's a question I want you to sit with for a moment. What's the biggest constraint on artificial intelligence development right now? It's not algorithms. It's not data. It's energy and physical space. Building a new data center on Earth takes 5 years on average for permitting, construction, grid connection, cooling infrastructure. Communities are pushing back against the water consumption and the power draw. Some U.S. states have effectively put a moratorium on new large-scale data center construction. The electricity grid in many countries is simply not expanding fast enough to keep up with AI's appetite. Now, what if you moved the data center to orbit? We've talked about this in prior episodes. In orbit, solar power is essentially unlimited. No clouds, no night cycle if you position correctly, no grid. Cooling happens passively by radiating heat into the infinite cold of deep space. There's no permitting, no community opposition, no land acquisition. There's a lot of potential benefits if we can get over the technical limitations. And there's a startup called StarCloud, founded in January 2024, less than 2.5 years ago, that launched the world's first high-powered GPU satellite in November 2025. NVIDIA H100 processor, orbiting Earth, training AI models in space. They became the first company to run a version of Google's Gemini AI from orbit. In March 26, They closed a $170 million Series A at a $1.1 billion valuation, becoming the fastest startup in Y Combinator's 21-year history to reach that unicorn status. They're planning a constellation of up to 88,000 satellites for orbital data centers. They proposed this to the FCC, and the FCC accepted this filing. 88,000 orbital data center satellites. That's not a white paper fantasy. That's a regulatory filing. It's going to happen. It's in their plan. Now, SpaceX also has a plan. They've gotten approval to launch 1 million. Different use case. It's pairing up with some of the other operations. But let's talk about the different. Let's talk about how Google has launched its own initiative of Project Suncatcher. Again, we talked about this on a prior podcast, where they're aiming to put solar-powered satellite clusters with tensor processing units into orbit by 2027. Blue Origin's TerraWave constellation of 5,500 satellites is designed for high-throughput orbital networking. And SpaceX, as I mentioned, has planned its own millions of satellite AI compute vision. And even China has launched the first cluster of its three-body computing constellation, a proposed 2,800 satellite orbital compute network. Now, are there legitimate questions about the economics? Absolutely. Some experts point out that the cost per unit of compute in space may not undercut ground-based facilities until Starship-class launch costs come way, way down. Fair enough. Maintenance is essentially impossible today. And so maybe the Tesla Optimus robots are sitting around doing all of the maintenance and so forth. Space weather is a real risk. And orbital debris is already a concern that gets worse with every additional satellite. But here's the pattern that we keep seeing in technology. The first version is expensive and limited. The second version is better and cheaper. By the 10th version, it's infrastructure. On the moon itself, the ambitions are even bolder. Lone Star Data Holdings is building a data center on the lunar surface. Not just in orbit around the moon, they want to do it on the surface. They've successfully tested the system on a lunar mission earlier this year, though the lander came down on its side and the system powered down early. That's a setback, not a failure. And they're pressing ahead with 6 data storage satellites planned for the Earth-Moon Lagrange, assuming I'm pronouncing that, the Earth-Moon Lagrange point. The reason for lunar data storage is actually quite elegant, actually. The moon is geologically stable. It has no earthquakes, no weather, no floods, and it's far enough from Earth that it serves as a genuine disaster recovery backup for civilization's most critical data. Meanwhile, multiple companies are now explicitly targeting lunar ice mining as a business. The water at the South Pole is not just scientifically interesting, it's economically interesting. Split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and you have rocket propellant. Build a fuel depot on the moon, and you could change the economics of everything but beyond low Earth orbit. The moon can become a refueling station, not a destination. It could be a waypoint beyond. Now, I want to step back from the funding rounds and the regulatory filings for a moment and ask a bigger question. For generations, we've had a shared vision of what the future in space looks like. We've watched it play out in fiction, in the films and books and TV series that shaped our imagination. The orbital stations, the moon bases, the asteroid miners, the colony ships heading for other worlds, boldly going where no other man has been before. For most of the last 50 years, that vision felt stuck. We went to the moon, and then we stopped. We built a space station, and we kept it in low Earth orbit, doing good science, but not quite moving the frontier. The gap between what the stories promised and what actually happened at times felt like a wound. But now, I look at what's actually happening, and I find myself genuinely surprised. We have humans heading back to the moon. Not as a one-off stunt, but as the first step towards a sustained human presence. We have private companies racing to build orbital infrastructure, not because governments told them to, but because economics now makes sense. We have genuine funded serious plans for manufacturing in microgravity, for mining on the moon, for data centers in orbit. The interplanetary story, the one about becoming a multi-planet species, is no longer confined to Elon Musk's conference slide decks. It's in regulatory filings. It's in rocket test programs. It's in the hiring plans of hundreds of companies. Starship, if it works, changes the physics of the solar system. A fully reusable heavy lift vehicle that can put hundreds of tons into orbit per launch, potentially for under $100 per kilogram. Oh, this opens up trajectories to Mars that are genuinely practical rather than theoretical. Are we going to Mars in the next 10 years? I don't know. The engineering challenges are vast. The physiological challenges of long-duration deep space travel are real and largely unsolved. The political and financial will required is enormous. There will be setbacks. There will be tragedies. There will be moments where it all seems too hard. But the direction of travel? That seems clear to me. We live in the moment where the gap between the stories and the reality is closing faster than it has in half a century. Where a 2-year-old startup can train an AI model in orbit, where 4 humans are right now flying around the moon. The sci-fi stories aren't coming true all at once, but they're coming true one satellite, one startup, one mission at a time. And I find that genuinely extraordinary. And that does it for this episode of Sea of Startups. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to, please give it a like, give it a review, subscribe to our channel. A little bit of feedback goes a long way in allowing us to keep on putting out these kind of episodes.